Hi everyone! This lecture is going to be about visual development in infancy. Check out that cute baby and his big baby eyes. Okay, so when infants start to notice human faces, they start to attend to certain visual patterns. And this diagram is illustrating how visual patterns change from 1 month to 2 months old. So we know that infants are really drawn to looking at the human face for obvious reasons. Human beings, the adults in their lives, are the ones who are providing them food and safety, so they're really naturally drawn to the human face. But the way that they process the human face changes over the course of infancy. So this diagram indicates data that was collected with something that is called an eye tracker. And an eye tracker is a device that sort of measures movement. So all those lines on the screen are the device measuring where the infant's gaze was. So on the left-hand side, you see the infant's gaze at a woman's face. And you could imagine that this could be the mother's face. So at 1 month old, you can see that the infant is really noticing areas of high contrast. So areas around the chin and the hairline is where they're looking the most. And if you look at those squiggly lines back and forth around the chin and around the hairline, that means that the infant is scanning back and forth a whole bunch. So basically what the infant is doing here is just kind of getting the gist of where the face is and kind of the outer edges of it. And then infant looks at the eyes a little bit too. Now contrast that with 2 months old. So from 1 month to 2 months, the visual gaze patterns change, and infant's gaze is really focused on the eyes of the mother and the mouth of the mother, and not as much on the outer areas of contrast, the outer borders of her face and her head. And the reason for this is that this is the time that infants are starting to process emotions. So a lot of the emotions that mother is expressing, she's expressing through her eyes and through her mouth. And so infants around 2 months of age are starting to be able to process those emotions and sort of take them in. And their gaze patterns tell us how they're doing it. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so we all know that infants are born with pretty poor visual acuity. And these bullets sort of illustrate how visual acuity is really developing from newborn age up through about 8 months. So newborn's visual acuity for identifying objects is about 20 to 660. So you know when you go to the eye doctor and sometimes they might say, if you're a lucky person, they might say, hey, you've got 20/20 vision. They don't say that to me because I've got like 20/50 vision. But for infants, their vision is about 2660 for newborns. And around 2 months of age, they get to be about 2300. 4 months of age, they're at 2160. And then at 8 months, they're at 2080. So you can see there's really drastic improvement over the months of infancy. So let's check out what that even looks like, because that's just a bunch of numbers. These 4 are images that are indicating how that vision sort of develops. And they don't necessarily map onto this 2660, 2300, 2160, and so forth, but what they do represent is how visual acuity is becoming more and more refined from newborn age up through about the first 9 months or so. So as you can see, the top left box, the mother's face is really, really blurry. And then it gets a little bit more defined in the top right box. And then the lower left box, it's even more defined. And then in the bottom right, it's the most defined. Here it is. So the top left is 1 month old, 2 month old, 3 month old, and then the bottom right is adult level vision, if you have good eyes. So you can see infants really can't see a lot, which is why it's important for infants to have really high stimulation environment. So if they're going to be looking at things, infants can't really process tiny, fine patterns. That's why babies' rooms have kind of big, colorful things in them, because that's all babies can process. Okay, so remember when you guys read the Forgotten Children article and you learned about critical periods for IQ development and social development with the Romanian orphans? Well, there's also a critical period for vision. And we know about the critical period for vision from a study that involved kittens. Some of you might have heard this study before. If you've taken a psychology class, this might be familiar to you. So we know that the human critical period for vision is between 3 and 8 months. That means that vision really needs to develop between 3 and 8 months. So remember last week when we were talking about brain development and the occipital lobe in the back part of the brain? This is probably the time you would assume that this is when the occipital lobe is developing, which is true. The occipital lobe is developing, but also the rods and cones, or pieces of the eye, all the eye structure things, are really becoming more and more defined. So they were definitely all in place as the infant was developing in utero, but after infant was born, then it starts to develop and become more refined. So during this 3 and 8 months is this really critical time. And so this kitten study that I just mentioned was done by someone named Torsten Wiesel in 1963. And what happened in this study was they were investigating the critical period for vision. And what they did was they subjected poor little kittens to visual deprivation. And so this is going to be really yucky, so if you love kittens, brace yourselves. What they did was they took newborn kittens and they put them under anesthesia, and they sewed their eyes shut. They sewed them shut. And then they waited some time and put them under anesthesia again, and then they reopened their eyes. And they did this under many different circumstances to try to figure out when the visual critical period for vision was. And they discovered it. Through this research, they discovered the critical period for vision, because if they left the eyes shut for too long and then reopened them when the cat was too old, the vision would never develop. They would never develop vision. They'd be blind for life. So even if they did it for a 3-4 month period and then opened the kitten's eyes back up again, that vision just missed the critical period. It missed that window. And so when they did such a thing with adult cats, and adult cats that had never been subject to this sort of study before, and then put the adult cats under and opened their eyes back up a few months later, nothing happened. Nothing happened. It was a little distressing for the adult cats, but their vision stayed intact. It's because they were past that critical period. They were able to develop normal vision. The critical period was over. So really sad study, but also tells us a lot about the development of vision in mammals. Okay, so visual development is also really highly connected with motor development. So these two things are really closely intertwined. And one way that we know that is that if a child has a visual impairment or even an auditory impairment, it can lead to delays in motor development. So remember again when we were talking about brain development, and that there was a certain part of the brain that was responsible for understanding perceptual distances for things, and I gave you guys an example of a toddler climbing up and down the stairs and learning where her body goes and how to navigate the stairs. Think about if your vision is somewhat impaired. How well are you going to be able to judge your body's distance from other things? How well are you going to understand where your feet and your legs go when you're climbing up the stairs on the playground? Probably not that well. So those things are really highly connected. And also, it doesn't even have to do with impairments. It can also be related to when vision is developing. So think about the times in infancy while vision is developing. It's the same time when babies are learning to crawl, right? It's the same time when their motor development is happening. And so think about if your vision is not totally developed and all you're seeing is a blurry world in front of you, it's really going to affect the way that you crawl. So there's this thing called exploratory movements. And those are movements that are produced in order to generate this perceptual information. So it's really coordinating between your visual perception and your motor development. And so infants will stick out a leg or stick out an arm and reach for something and see how far away it is. They'll check. They'll try to touch the couch. They'll reach out and touch the couch. They'll reach out and touch the house plant that's on the shelf to see if they can reach it and knock it over. They're exploring their environment, and they're really testing their vision and their motor skills. And so connected to this is the fact that infants who start to crawl have really developed their visual perception than the ones who haven't crawled yet. So before crawling, your visual perception isn't that great. But after you start crawling, your visual perception really starts to develop. And there's a really awesome study that illustrates this that I want you guys to, after you're done watching this PowerPoint, which you almost are, to take a look at the video. It's under modules and it's under Visual Cliff. Just like this red box here is a link to it, but I won't play it for you. You can better watch it in Canvas or on YouTube. And this illustrates how infants who are able to crawl better have this better visual perception. I think it's really interesting, and I think you're going to like it. So enjoy, and I will see you in class.